All right, I'm gonna get started, folks. Welcome. This is my Women in Tech IT. Sorry, my Women in IT sponsored presentation here. We want to talk about some soft skills, some communication issues in the workplace. So my name is Sayali Christina. I also had a ton of help from Jennifer, technical angel on the community. She unfortunately was not able to make it to Spice World last minute this year, but I did want to give her a shout out because she did help a lot with the presentation and putting everything together. So we're going to talk about three main things here. I want to talk about dealing with users, dealing with management, and then also dealing with some of the common barriers that we deal with in the workplace, both in STEM careers and in other careers. So first off, dealing with users, it's a chore sometimes. It can be very difficult to relate to non-technical people who just don't get it or don't want to get it. And a lot of what we do is handling things that really are not IT's job and not IT's problem. The biggest thing you can do, learn to gracefully say no. It's very, very difficult. Saying no was one of the hardest things it was for me to learn. But honestly, it really accelerated my skill level and my confidence when I did learn to say no, because when you do that gracefully, people don't take it as a no, and they see that you're apologetic about it. So a good way to do that is first bring up other projects. Like, man, I'd really love to help you, but I don't have the extra time. I'm working on such and such project for my boss. Joke about it. Sorry, like, I left my spare toilet plunger at home. I can't fix the toilet, but you can reach out to maintenance and they might be able to help you. You want to make sure to let them know what department they should actually reach out to, because if you just say no, that doesn't help them. It's whatever it is still broken. But if you can point them in the right direction of who or what department can help them, that helps a ton, and it makes you look good in the process. You also want to get management involved, which is, it can be rougher with the smaller businesses because management might want IT to help with those things, and we will talk about that in a little bit. But when you get management involved, their manager and yours, and they know your time is being wasted with these things that you shouldn't be doing, it helps a lot when they have your back. Things to avoid, never say, that isn't my job or that isn't my role, because that comes off as you just brushing off the responsibility, and that makes you look bad. So always gracefully say no, do it in a way that doesn't come off as you just don't want to help them, because then they're not going to trust you when they ask for other things. So also relating better to non-technical users. There's a language barrier a lot of times with STEM folk and non-technical users. You need to connect with them on a personal level because they'll be more responsive to you. If they see you as a person and they know that you see them as a person and not just some problem you have to deal with, they're going to be much more likely to be open with you. Talk on their level. Don't try to use jargon. It immediately turns them off because they don't know what you're talking about and you come off condescending. So you want to use things that they can understand. Don't be sarcastic. I know it can be super, super tempting unless you have a really good rapport with the user you're joking around with. I know my last job, the first thing I asked my users when they came to me with a problem, even if it wasn't computer related, was, have you tried turning it off and on again? And it became just a joke around the office. So anytime someone had a problem with anything, another user would pop in with, have you tried turning it on and off again? It was really funny to walk through the office and hear that all the time. But when you do it in a friendly way, it's okay, but as long as you have that good rapport with your users. You also want to be personable. Show them that you are a person, that you're not just some mindless IT admin that fixes things behind the scenes and doesn't want to talk to people. I know that I don't generally want to deal with people, when I'm at work, but you need to be personable, joke and chit chat with them, but make sure you always have some sort of out, because there are some very chatty users that will just keep going and tell you their life story. So make sure you have a way to gracefully escape that. Also, make sure to use comparisons that they can relate to. And I've got a couple examples in here. One of my favorites is the bandwidth as a highway. So you have your 4-lane highway. When only a few people are using it, it's great. You can go 100 miles an hour and you don't have to worry about anyone but the cops. But when you've got all 4 lanes full of traffic, as in a bunch of people using the internet at the same time and downloading big things, now it's going to be slower to get through. That's something that they can understand. It's something that they deal with every day probably, and it helps them to understand what you're trying to talk about. Another thing that can really help is providing training. You generally will need some management buy-in for it, but I am a huge proponent of the Lunch and Learn system. It worked fantastic at my last job. It's a very, very informal setting, which makes people very comfortable to ask questions and talk and not feel like they're being judged. It doesn't feel like a classroom setting. We would do it in our conference room and got the company to sponsor lunch for $100 and had a dozen users come in. They'd sit, we'd eat, chit-chat a little bit. I'd be sitting with them and have a little presentation. We'd kind of just go through slides and just have a conversation. And people picked up a lot that way. Most of my sessions were more Q&A than presentation, but I did stuff on things like Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel. How do you get the most out of those? What are the shortcuts you can use? You can do Control-Enter to send an email in Outlook, and little things like that blew their mind, but it also increased their productivity, which was fantastic. It also helps sometimes if you make it come off as a favor for them. I'm really busy today, but let me know when you're free tomorrow. I can see if I can set aside, an hour of time, and we can step through this process with you, and that way I can see where these roadblocks are, and we can try to find a solution to this. It's coming off as you're giving them an hour of your time or whatever to help them out rather than to train them because they don't know what they need to know. My favorite here, again, documentation. Document everything. If you're making it for non-technical users, make sure you use pictures because they will question everything. If a pop-up comes up that is not in your documentation, they will stop and call you. So make sure document everything, circle things, mark what buttons they need to click. And have a user that is non-technical go through your documentation step by step, have them follow that process and watch them to see where their hangups are and how you need to modify that. Having ready-made documentation saved me so much time because I'd get an email before we had a ticketing system, Spiceworks, installed. I'd get an email saying, oh, I don't know how to do this thing. Hold on, forward an email that I sent 2 months ago, and that was all it took of my time. So management is a whole nother beast than the users, which can be just as difficult sometimes. The biggest skill that you can learn is learning to speak boss. Because if you can learn to speak boss, you can get what you need from management a whole lot easier. And the number one part of that is numbers. They don't care about feelings, emotions. They don't care about what would make things easier on you. They care about the bottom line. If you don't have the numbers to back up your requests, they don't care. So support all of your requests with hard numbers. ROIs are fantastic. If you can get an ROI analysis done, that is a great way to show exactly what you need. Who's unfamiliar with ROIs? One. Okay, so an ROI, it's a return on investment. What it means is it shows basically all of your costs that you're going to spend on this project, opposed to how much money is going to be saved or earned in the future. And you want to find that break-even point. So, for example, a project I did at my last company, $750,000 printer consolidation and document management program. It's a hard ask getting $750,000. That's $750,000. But the vendor actually did a whole ROI analysis showing that even with paying for this software, we would be saving like $20,000 a month in printing costs. When they saw those savings, that made it a lot easier to get that signature. And our time is limited, but a lot of times the salespeople's time is not as limited. They have other people they can loop in to work with you on that. So if you don't have the time to do something like that, get your sales rep to do it. Have them come in and talk to your users or analyze your environment, because they have more resources generally. And if they want to make that sale, they're going to put in a little bit of work to do it. You also want to shop for quotes. A lot of times you can find that a company that can consolidate all the services into one price is going to be a lot cheaper. I know one of my SpiceCore members was telling me how she just got a whole refresh of her server equipment from Scale for way less than she would have gotten anywhere else because they did the hardware, they did the licensing, they did the setup, they did everything, and that would have been a cost at each different step buying that from someone else. And you also want to translate every single ask into costs. So remember those users that are bothering you with things that aren't your job? Your time is valuable. Your time costs the company money, not just what they pay you, but in your benefits and everything. Your time costs money. Another example would be like the cost of a phishing breach versus the cost of phishing training at $10 a user or whatever. So some of the things that you might not think about, you know the hardware, software, licensing, and services, but your time, the cost of an expert to recover from a breach, the lost productivity from users the computers being down, users not being able to do their work, lost sales or customers, or lost opportunities and leads because your phones are down or whatever. Those are all things that are very high costs for the company. You also want to offer multiple solutions and have a very succinct benefits analysis and costs. I have succinct bolded there because just like your time is valuable, your boss's time is valuable. They're not going to be listening to a long, rambling spiel. They want very quick bullet points. What's the good? What's the bad? How much is it going to cost me? Again, be brief. Don't go into long ramble. Just share what's relevant. And another very, very important point is be confident. If you don't come off as confident, if your boss doesn't think that you're confident about whatever you're asking, they're not going to be confident. If you don't trust in you, why are they going to trust in you? So even if you're iffy on it, you need to project that confidence. Do the Superman pose, 5 minutes before you go talk to them. I know it sounds funny, but it's actually proven to work. You force the smile and you do the Superman pose. It's a powerful pose, and it tricks your body into thinking like it's a confidence builder. Go in the bathroom, sit there 5 minutes, and I promise it'll change your life. It's great. Never be afraid to say, I don't know, as well. There's a lot of things I don't know. There's a lot of things you all don't know. But if you say, I'm not sure, I don't know exactly, but let me look into it and I'll get back to you. That is a very grown-up and adult response, but it also shows them that even though you don't know, you're going to find out. And then the important part of that is you need to do the research and follow up with them promptly. Within the next couple days, reach out to someone that might be able to help you, post on Spiceworks, do your research on Google, and at least have something to send them back to say, hey, I'm still looking into this, but here's some preliminary results of whatever. And again, summarize it for them to show them that you're good for your word. And just like with the users, use language on their level. Just because they're a CEO or a high-powered executive doesn't mean they know any more about their computer than Jane sitting next to you or Tom on your, in maintenance or whatever. You need to be able to use words that they can understand. And again, don't come off condescending. It's important for the users. It is more important for your boss because your boss can let you go if they don't like you. And don't ever self-deprecate. That was one of my bad habits that I really needed to break was people would say, oh, that was a great job. And it's like, oh, it was nothing. You don't want people to think that it's nothing. You want people to appreciate what you do. And you don't want your boss to think anybody can do your job because then they'll find someone cheaper, This is a big one that I see on the community a lot. People wanting technical solutions to management issues. So first off, key point here, have an acceptable use policy. If you don't have one, create it. Acceptable use policy, if you need help pushing that to management, that protects the business. If you don't have an acceptable use policy that says you can't surf porn at work, and a user starts surfing porn at work and gets a virus, you can't really do anything. One, because that wasn't something that you said they couldn't do. And for two, if that virus, sends out confidential company data, your company could face some pretty heavy fines, and they didn't do anything wrong according to your policies. So an acceptable use policy is extremely important. You can find templates on Google. If you have any trouble, please feel free to reach out to me on the community. Happy to point you in the right direction. But definitely, if you don't have one, get one in place and enforce it. Managers very often want those technical solutions to control their staff behavior, and they often want the world. They want access to everything. Users want access to everything. They don't want you to say no to their admin access because they want to install Candy Crush on their computer and sit there and play that. So again, you need to get management involved. You need to loop in their manager, and you need to loop in your manager and make sure that they have your back on that. A good way to go about that is asking, what are you trying to accomplish? You know, I know you want admin access, but what are you trying to accomplish? And maybe they just need a printer installed and they can't do it because they don't have the access to do it, but they want to do it themselves. But if you can work with the users to go through their processes and see what they actually need, a lot of times it's either a training issue, it's an HR issue, or it's a simple issue of installing whatever software they need. And by working with them directly, instead of just saying no or acceding to their request, you can figure out a different way to handle what they need. If a manager thinks it's their idea to stop the users or to say no to the users, that is the best option if you can get that. A great way to do that is write up a quote. Like, oh, this user wants this gaming rig for their document processing. All right, here's the quote. Here's how much of my time will cost. Here's how much all the software will cost. Here's the licensing. Here's the new monitor. And pull up this whole quote and say, all right, that's what it's going to cost your department. That's not coming out of my budget because it's not a need. When they see that $5,000, $6,000 quote, they're going to say no to their user. Like, we're not paying that. Customer service isn't paying for that. You can use your computer. You can use that old XP machine that's sitting in the server room for 6 years. You're not getting that computer. But when the manager thinks it's their idea, it's all kosher. You know, they're not going to hate the IT person for saying no to them. They're going to appreciate that you gave them what they needed and they decided to say no. And again, make sure your boss has your back. Make sure HR has your back if you have an HR department. Refer managers to them if they won't accept your no. And sometimes we have bosses that make us do what the managers want. They make us cater to, you know what, I don't care if that's going to cost $6,000. Customer service wants it, go set it up for them. And your hands are tied. But keep track of all of those costs, including your time. Remember, that is very, very valuable because the company is paying for that too. Last thing to think about, technology can't fix apathy. You know, it can't fix carelessness. It can't fix a refusal to follow policy. And if that is your corporate culture, it may be worth looking for an out, somewhere to move on. Asking for a raise. This is something that a lot of people requested here. First off, you have to ask for it. Millennials which is a very large number of the workforce right now, are far less likely to even ask for a raise or negotiate salary when they're hired compared to any other generation. We don't ask for it. Hell, my current job, I asked for a bump and I got $5,000 extra just for asking. You know, if you don't ask, you can't get it. The worst you'll hear is no. 84% of companies expect you to negotiate. If they expect you to negotiate anyway, they're lowballing you. You want to get what you're worth. And it's much easier to negotiate that when you're hired than when you're asking for a raise, but it's still show your worth and ask for what ask for what you deserve. You remember all those tasks that you did that really weren't your job? Time you fixed the toilet or the coffee maker, make sure your boss remembers. Keep those lists, and when it comes time for reviews or raise, make sure that your boss remembers all those extra things that you wasted your time on that were not IT related. Also, know your market value. Come prepared. These are some sites that I personally like. Glassdoor is all user submitted, but the other ones do salary analysis of common similar roles to you in your area. So you know in your geographic location, what about your role goes for. And you also need to adjust for cost of living. If you were hired at $50,000 6 years ago and you're still making $50,000, you should be at least getting 2 or 3% each year just for cost of living. So that's another thing that you can cite. Like, look, my cost of living has gone up X amount and I need this extra money to continue to live comfortably. That's another great way to sort of prod them to bump you up. Also, remember that your experience is worth money. And it's not just your experience in education and certification and at past places. Your experience with your company is valuable. Because if it might be cheaper for them to give you a couple $1,000s extra than to bring in someone off the street and wait the 6 months it takes for them to be fully familiar with the environment. You are intimately familiar with your company's environment already. You also want to save your thank you emails from users. How many of you actually have gotten a thank you email from a user? Yeah? Print those out, send them to your personal email, put them on Google Drive, save them in Outlook, make sure somewhere off of a company computer. I'm always a huge proponent of backing stuff up personal that I need to keep off of company computers, because just in case, but save those. Make sure your boss sees those. If someone is seriously, profusely thankful for something you did, just subtly be like, hey, I'm trying for a raise next week. Can you do me a favor and just email my boss? Tell them how much I helped you out. When your boss sees that and sees how much you do for the users, that helps to show your worth a little bit more. You also want to have a list of any projects and certifications or education that you've completed while you've been working on your job. Make sure you have a brag sheet available. That's a great thing. If you're not familiar with them, just Google brag sheet. It's essentially like a very condensed resume, just very quick lists of projects and stuff that you've done that show, again, your worth. Also, this is a really cool one I found during my research. Have a tally of how much money you've saved the company. If you've implemented all these projects, or like my Spice Corps member who, saved a bunch of money with scale, be like, hey, look, I saved y'all $80,000 last year. I'm asking for a $5,000 raise. That puts it a little bit more into perspective for your boss. And if their budget strings are tied that tight and they can't give you more money, there's a whole lot of other things in your compensation package that you can ask for. PTO, work from home, stock options, paid training budget, more travel or less travel. Relocation package if you want to try to move, from one campus to another. Less on-call. There's all sorts of things. Daycare subsidies, childcare subsidies, maternity or paternity leave. There's all these other things you can ask for if they can't give you more money. Extra PTO is one of my favorites because I like that break, It's nice to get away and decompress, and it's good for your mental health, honestly, to take a break from things for a while. There's a great book on Google. I'd highly recommend. I'll have these slides available, but take a picture of that. It's free. You can go to that link and get this book, Negotiating Your Salary by Jack Chapman. It's been highly suggested to me by multiple people, and like I said, it's free. So if you don't like it, you're not paying anything for it. But like I said, I'll also have my slides available afterwards too, if that's easier. But it's a really great read. You also might want to consider looping in a career consultant. This woman, I attended a seminar she did on negotiating your salary, Letitia Bird. She knows what she's talking about. She's been in Forbes and a couple business magazines, and highly recommend looking into, if not her, another career consultant if you are at a point in your career where they won't boost your salary or they won't work with you. It's a way to kind of get over that hump that you're stuck at. So the last thing I want to talk about is dealing with barriers. A lot of us that don't fit that stereotypical IT guy image deal with barriers. And a lot of us that do fit that image deal with barriers. So first of all, diversity in general is very, very good for business. Multiple studies have shown having women on executive boards produces 19% more revenue. I've seen anywhere between 13 and 20-something%. And also, another study showed 53% more return on equity when there was an equal board. I was just talking to Cisco last night, and they said when they made their board 50% women, a lot of really positive policies were put in place that just guys don't think about, like longer maternity leave for the women and adding paternity leave so that fathers have time with their kids too. That's something that a lot of people don't generally think about, but when you add those other perspectives, the corporate culture it flourishes. Higher diversity, just in general, is also linked to higher corporate responsibility. I mean, we've all seen the companies that don't care, that just dump their stuff wherever, or just take from their employees. But when your whole company is very diverse, they're generally more likely to care, because if they alienate a large portion of their employees, they're screwing themselves over. While diversity is good, you really want to avoid tokenism. How many of you have some hiring power here or have hired people? Okay. So a really great way to organically increase diversity is by changing what pools of applicants you target. You want to target underserved categories when you're posting your jobs. And then once you have your applicant pool, you'll notice it's very diverse compared to if you just post in specific places that attract certain people, the typical STEM people. Once you have that diverse application pool, now when you pick the best person for the job, regardless of any minority status, you're going to find you're organically going to be adding more diversity to your team. So first barrier I want to go over, sexism. It's something I could honestly talk for days about. The things that I have personally experienced, the things that other women techs that I know have experienced. Being nice is not flirting in the workplace. If you help a user and they start coming onto you, that happens a lot. We also deal with pet names a lot. It's very condescending. Like, oh, thank you, sweetie. Fix my computer. Thanks, sweetheart. It's not okay. It's one thing if it's a friend doing it. It's another thing if it's a stranger or someone that you support. I deal with it from the techs at work sometimes, and it sucks. Or the cover your ears so that you don't hear bad words. And also a lot of times just being assumed incompetent rather than assumed competent. I cannot count anymore how many other women in tech fields that have been assumed that they were the secretary or that they were just helping out until the actual IT guy came in. Or what someone said today when they were here at Spice World. One of our people that was in registration overheard a couple guys talking like, wow, there's a lot more women here than I expected. What, are they not afraid of us anymore? Things like that, it sucks when you hear it all the time. Racism is another big one that a lot of people deal with. And this especially goes for women of color. It is the most difficult for them to experience work without discrimination. Having an ethnic name means you have to apply to 50% more jobs to get the same amount of callbacks as someone with a very white-sounding name. A lot of the bias is unconscious, but even consciously, there's discrimination in recruitment, in hiring, and in promotions. And again, a lot of times people of color are assumed incompetent before they're assumed competent, and they have to prove that they know what they're doing. Ageism is another big thing. 43% of workers across STEM are fearful of losing their job due to their age. 36% of them report that they weren't taken seriously due to their age, whether they were too old or too young for what people expected. There's sometimes layoffs of older folks or the refusal to hire them, and it's very, very difficult to prove that age is the reason. Lots of inappropriate age-related comments, too, like, oh, Larry's a dinosaur. He's not going to know how to do that. Or Jeff just got out of school. He's not experienced. You can't give that to him. You can't trust him with that. Those are things that I've heard before about other people. And it's seriously condescending, and it makes people question themselves. And again, being assumed incompetent if you're younger, or being assumed that stuck in your ways if you're older and that you can't learn things. Whole bunch of other prejudices. I just want to comment on a couple ones. LGBTQ people have experienced a lot of harassment in the workplace, and that jumps to 32% for trans and non-binary folks. 63% of Muslims, and this was a study that was done in the US, report discrimination at work. Employers will refuse to hire pregnant women, or when they come back to work, they find a pink slip on their desk because their position was eliminated. There's also stereotypes against people with disabilities or mental illness. A quick story is I deal with anxiety, And one of my colleagues would always talk about, oh, these people with anxiety that have their medications, they just need to get over it. It's just a mental thing. They just need to get over it. This is a medication culture. And I sat down and explained to him, I'm like, look, this is a chemical imbalance in the brain. And I'm someone you know, and the things that you say like this, these ignorant statements, they hurt me. You know, they invalidate who I am and what I deal with in my struggles. And I don't know that he fully understood it, but he never made those comments again because he understood that those made me uncomfortable and feel unwelcome in my job environment. There's all sorts of derogatory comments and slurs, refusal to honor someone's pronouns, lots of harmful humor that makes people feel uncomfortable in their work environment. So how do you deal with that? You want to document everything. Keep a diary, dates and times, location, the other people that are present, witnesses. If something is left, take a photo of it. One of the women I worked with at my last job, she had a very creepy coworker that would leave her gifts on her desk. And she didn't take pictures of them, but I highly recommend take a photo, document the scene essentially. But she gave that to her boss and was like, look, this is what he just gave me, or he left on my desk. When you have that physical evidence, it makes it, management has to deal with it. They can't just pretend or do the he said, she said thing. There's physical evidence there. Also ask that if you report anything with management, they make a written report that you can keep. You can document that for later if you do have to get a third party involved. You also want to talk over any incident with someone who is completely removed from the situation, because something that happens with people who deal with discrimination on a daily basis, you either get callous to it and things that are actually a big deal, you feel like, it happens all the time. It's not a big deal. And someone else removed from the situation is like, they shouldn't be calling you that. You need to talk to someone about that. And the other extreme is sometimes we get oversensitive to it. You know, when you're constantly hearing these little insults and digs, you sometimes start taking everything, like thinking into everything, like, did they really mean good job, or were they being sarcastic when they said that? So getting an unbiased opinion is huge, because they can take a look at it and say whether you're reacting the right way, you know? You also want to enlist and educate allies to support you. So an ally, for those of you who aren't familiar, is just someone who is not part of a disadvantaged group, but supports you. They educate other people on your behalf. They step in and correct when other people do things that are harmful. And you also want to be an ally. You know, be mindful of what you say. Do you really want to make that joke if it's going to make your coworkers uncomfortable in their own work environment? A lot of times people don't necessarily know that what they're saying is discriminatory in any way. Like the people that I mentioned that were joking at the registration booth at Spice World, they probably didn't mean to be sexist, but as a woman, that makes me extremely uncomfortable. Like, do male IT pros really think that we're afraid of them and that's why we're not going into IT? So call those things out, because once people realize it and they're mindful of it, they can police that behavior internally. And if you are comfortable with it, educate people directly on it. A lot of times hearing it from someone they know and respect will help them, it'll help the wheels turn a little more. So dealing with it is one of the hardest things. You really need to decide how you want to react. So if you're comfortable, you can address them directly or loop in your boss. HR, I saw very, very mixed suggestions on whether to get HR involved, because HR's bottom line is to protect the company. And in smaller businesses, a lot of times HR's hands are tied. Just because something's going on doesn't mean that they even have the power to fire someone. That might go through another boss or a higher up. So that is a judgment call in your environment on whether it's good to get HR involved. Seeking advice for a lawyer, depending on the situation, might be the best course of action, or looping in the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Sometimes if things won't get better, a letter from the state or a letter from a lawyer will help your bosses decide to fix things. But if you do bring in a third party, that probably also goes with the fourth point of looking for an out, because there's always the chance that now it'll be a hostile work environment from the bosses down. And if your corporate culture is that where they won't deal with harassment, it might be best to start looking for a place to move on. The key thing to remember here is don't let others' negative thoughts and beliefs about you affect your own personal judgments. Remember your worth. Remember why they hired you. So I'm going to have a little bit of a discussion panel if our other panelists can come up. I'll have them introduce themselves as soon as they get situated here. Comfy? Cool. There you go. So first I'm going to give them a couple minutes to just introduce themselves, talk a little bit about who they are, and then I've got a couple questions, and then we'll open it up for Q&A here. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Angie Montgomery. I work for a AV media company in Burbank, California. I've been in IT for over 15 years. I have seen all the ups and downs and all the things that Christina was just talking about, and I hope to share some of those views with you.
My name is Darnell Granberry. I'm an IT director for a car dealership dealer group in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I've been with the company for 15 years, but I've only been in the IT department for about 5 years.
My name is Jimmy Tassin. I've been in IT for 12 years. I currently work at a telco I won't say on air. But before this, I was IT director at Midwest Regional Bank in St. Louis.
Cool. So my first question here, whoever wants to take it, can you talk a little bit about a time when you were asked to do something completely out of your job duties and how you said no to that?
Well, since I got the mic, I'll go ahead and start. So the one memory that sticks out in my mind is in my first job where I was at a healthcare facility. And it's actually a point that you had made earlier in your presentation is being asked by a manager to do something that the manager really should have done themselves. This one particular manager was having issues with his employees accessing the internet when they shouldn't have been, or going out in the back and smoking, or taking longer breaks or more frequent breaks than they should have been doing. And he came to IT and said, hey, I want access to the security cameras so I can keep track of my employees and know when they're doing something they're supposed to or not supposed to be doing. And my manager and I talked about it, and what we ended up deciding and reaching out, and at that point it was like a policy moving forward is, have you talked to your employees yet? If you believe they're doing this, have you talked to them? And you responded, no. So you want IT to track your employees and do your work for you so you don't have to deal with them. And he didn't really respond to that, but at that point, that was our policy moving forward, is if any manager ever talked to us about accessing cameras or seeing what their web traffic was, we talked to them. Did you talk to the employees first? If you believe this is happening, have you talked to them? And if they said no, it's like, all right, we're not doing anything.
That's funny. That must be like a thing in the industry. Being in the car dealership, before I was in IT, I've done a lot of other jobs. I've done salesperson, sales manager, floor manager, service department, and the body shop estimator. We had a manager come to me and ask me to block a couple of travel sites because two of his sales guys were going to Vegas and they were spending too much time looking at things to do, flights and stuff like that. And he wanted me to block those travel sites from those two guys' computer. Excuse me. I said, well, if it were me and I were their manager, I would just send them home. I said, I certainly wouldn't ask another manager to police my people for me. I said, but if you want me to do that, I will. And he was like, no, I'll take care of it.
Mine is a little bit of a different story. Before I worked with the company that I'm working with now, I was working in the healthcare industry. And as you know, the healthcare industry is 24/7 busy, busy, busy. So people were only allowed about 30-minute breaks, whereas the consultants, or I came in as a consultant, I was allowed a 1-hour break. So people frequently saw me out in a parking lot, having lunch, going back, playing my game, and then going back in the office while they had to hurry up and eat their lunch and go back in the office. So a rumor started that I was taking too long of a lunch break. So the rumor started with me. So it came to the IT manager, and the IT manager said, well, just tell them that you're on our lunch break. I said, well, why do I need to tell them? And that's really your thing. I mean, if the people are coming to you complaining that I'm taking an hour lunch break while they only have a half an hour, and they're employed by that company, and I'm an outside consultant, why are they coming to you and complaining that I have an hour lunch break and they're not? So that's really not an issue for me. The other way around, I was asked then 3 months later to watch some employees, which were nurses. They had nothing to do with me. As they were clocking in and out, because the clock in and out was right next to my door, and I had view and access of the door. So some people were complaining about were not clocking in on time, or they would just wait and clock in and not clock in the right time. So I was asked to spy on them, and I told them, no, I'm not going to do that. If you want to know I have a person on floor that you would like to have them spy on, then that's fine, because I'm not a spy and I don't have anything to do with those employees, but just help them with their IT requests and whatever they need. So, yeah.
Cool. So how about, can you share a story of some examples of how to get your boss to loosen the purse strings for a budget request?
So, when I think we really need something, I become a salesman. I'm not a salesman by trade or profession, but when I really believe into something, I will do my research. I will research and have an Excel sheet of the pros and cons and why we should and should not do it. Then I would tell them how the profit would increase or the traffic would decrease, and then in turn return into profit. You have to do your research. I am doing my research. When I really want something that I think is going to help you, little inexpensive tool, for instance, like a screenshot program that I wanted, because I've been working with it so long. I didn't want to get used to that screenshot program that they were working with because it didn't have all the options. So I went to my boss and said, hey, I really need this, because if you want me to do good documentation and with screenshots on with, how-to steps, and those documentations are going to other places, I want it to look professional. I wanted to have the right size. I don't want one picture to be 0.5 inches and the other picture to be 0.7 inches. I want it all unified in a nice Word document, so you'll be able to transfer it. And I got that program within the next month.
My boss has been my boss for 12 years, and I know how he is. Thankfully, he's very forward thinking. When it comes to like websites we're doing or lead generation, he's very technical, and so that helps me a lot. But that being said, I have to almost put myself in his shoes and look at things from his point of view and ask myself the questions that he's going to ask me. If I have the answers to the questions he's going to ask me, then he's more apt to give me what I'm asking for. If I don't, like you said, and I like, well, maybe I'll get back to you, he's more likely to say no because he doesn't believe that I think I need it. So having to put yourself in their position, answer the questions, talk confidently about it, and usually works out.
So Jared Bush had some good points on this yesterday in his talk, so you can always check out his recording later on. But this is something I did on a regular basis at the bank I was at. I had a certain amount that I could purchase myself. After that, I could talk to my boss about it and possibly get approval, but anything higher than this amount with him, and it had to go to a committee. So regularly, especially if it was a request from another employee, I would take that request, get details on it, like how much it would cost, how long it would take to implement, what are the benefits and the cons of it, and present that to committee and let them decide on what they want to do. Giving them those numbers, what the good and bad of that decision is, what's involved in implementing that decision, gave them everything they needed to decide what they want to do. If they didn't want to do it, then I just report back to the employees like, sorry, I can't do it. The committee decided no. And at that point, it's like they can't really come back on me and complain about it. It's like, it's not my decision. It was the committee's.
Cool. So I have one more question before we open it to Q&A. How did you negotiate your last raise or pay bump if you were starting a new position? tips and tricks?
Sure.
Or,
Well, as you kind of said, is doing your research, understanding what your value is, going to some of those salary sites to get an idea. And when the price comes up, just say, hey, this is the number I've got in mind. What's your counteroffer? The negotiations are always tricky. It's always an uncomfortable thing. So doing research beforehand helps get rid of some of that uncomfortableness and being a little bit pressure, putting some of the pressure back on your boss or the other company is always going to be helpful, being more comfortable in doing that. And then, if it's not going to go your way, just make sure that when you go into negotiation that you have a hard limit of how far or how low you want to go or how low you're going to accept. And if they're not meeting that at all, then you need to be ready to step away.
For me, I have printed out all my IT tickets. I print out emails from other users just to document all the stuff that I've done for the company. Typically, I rarely have to pull it out. I mean, I work for a really good company, so I'm very fortunate in that. I joke with my boss. He'll ask me to do something, and I'll say I'll do it. That's why you pay me the medium bucks, and not the big bucks. And he laughs at that. But he knows the struggle. He knows the cost of living, and I really don't have to negotiate that raise. Thankfully, it's just all kind of offered and given to me. So I'm pretty fortunate about that.
if you get the chance, you want to find a work environment like Darnell. I gave them my list. I gave him my list beforehand. I'm like, these are the questions I'm planning to ask, and he's like, I don't have a problem with any of this stuff. So,
lucky you. I'm actually going to be coming up on salary negotiations, and this will be sort of my first time.
Oh.
I've did a lot of research, and I watched a couple of YouTube videos. It's just like when you're trying to figure out how to put on your eyeliner and you don't know how to do it, you watch a YouTube video, right? So I watched a couple of them on how to negotiate your raise, and there are plenty of them out there, believe me. The one thing that I would say is that I guess I'm sort of lucky because I live in California, and the gas prices are horrendous. We are probably at $3.99 right now per gallon. And even though I have to only drive to work 30 minutes, and it's only about 20 miles, that racks up. And the gas prices weren't that bad when I started there. Plus, my living costs are going up. Rents are currently going up because there's no rent control in place, and the landlords are going crazy. So those two things is I need to be comfortable. I need to be able to get to work. And it wasn't as expensive when I started, but I am doing the print out your things. The company I work for, they're very appreciative of me, and which is the companies I previously worked before. I was just the grunt, the person that does IT. I wasn't really, and IT really is a position you don't really get appreciated in. It's rarely that you get a thank you from anybody, but when it does, it's like a golden ticket. And so but when those letters come in, and most of the time I don't have to ask for them, I send them straight to my boss, or I say, hey, can you send a note to my boss and let him know that I'm doing okay, I'm doing good. And all this will reflect in my negotiations with him. Hey, the users are satisfied with me. I'm doing more than you expected of me, and I'm gonna put myself out there and say, hey, this is what I'm worth, and my life has gotten a bit more expensive, so I need a little bump here. And the thing is, once you invest in your employees, it's really an investment. It's not something you throw out, because once you invest in them, I really think it's just like, letting wine grow or something. With time, their investment comes back to you, and they'll be more productive. So,
cool. Thank you. All right, actually keep that. So I'll keep my panel up here. Does anyone have any questions, either about the presentation or for the panel? Or yep, we've got a microphone runner anywhere. Okay, cool.
This is probably more for Christina, but in your research, did you discover, is there an age threshold where we should just not look for another job? because ageism is real. If
it
you're
is.
over 50,
I mean,
it's going to cost so much.
Yeah, you don't always have a choice. My dad works in quality. He's a quality assurance manager, and just before he turned 55, he got laid off. He didn't have a choice, and it was very difficult. Luckily, I do all this career research, so I'm like, give me your resume, like I'll help you, but you don't always have a choice. And it really doesn't necessarily matter your age. A lot of people judge on looks. That's where a lot of discrimination comes from, is looks. My biggest advice would be to curate your resume when you are looking, and also put at the forefront a couple things. So first, get rid of all the old experience. Like if you worked with Novell, hell, I worked with Novell and I'm in my 20s and it's the worst. But things that aren't relevant to the current market, don't put it on a resume. You can maybe bring it up in an interview, but don't really put that on the resume. People with very long resumes, generally that indicates age before people even see you. So that's another thing to think of. Try to keep it to 2 pages, and just relevant stuff for that. Another thing is demonstrate your flexibility. Because like I mentioned in my presentation, with age, one of the things that people tend to unconsciously or consciously believe is that older folks can't pivot. They can't learn new things. So if you can show, well, I just got this certification last year, I just went and took a class, or, I just did this project last year, or this research. If you put those things at the forefront, that helps a little bit. But as far as when to look for a new job, I mean, I don't think there's a hard age on it. I don't think you always have a choice, but there's some things you can do to sort of help. I don't know if anyone else has any comments that you could add.
Just have a small comment. I'm up there in age as well. And I thought that when I left the consulting group that it was going to be harder for me to find a job. There are companies out there that are willing to hire for what you are, and they don't discriminate against their really good companies out there. They don't discriminate against age or what you look like, or they just want to see what you can bring to the table. You're enthusiastic in your interview, and you put forth a good attitude and a good, I'm going to do what you need me to do attitude. That's more likely to win you any more favors than, like dyeing your hair black because you have grays. It doesn't, looks. Sometimes they do play a part, and it's probably the first judgmental thing. But I'm firsthand witness. There's the company I work for. They hired folks over 50, over 55, and it's just about their attitude. And they got through HR because their attitude was so awesome that their go-to attitude. They want to do their job, and that's the kind of people that they hire. So it all depends, I believe.
I hope that kind of. Yeah. Oh, did you have something to add, Darnell? Oh, no? Okay. Any other questions? Yep. Oh. Hold on one sec. We'll bring the microphone.
The room is a little large.
Yeah. We should have had 2 microphone runners.
And I'm not a runner. Okay, who raised their
And
hand? Help me.
I feel that. I'm not a runner either, if you can't tell.
So I'm actually a student. I'm graduating high school in June.
Okay.
And I just want to know if, like I know they won't hire young because I'm only 18. So what are things to kind of get my career started once I get out of high school? What are ways for me to easily get a job once I get out with IT and whatnot?
So I actually have a lot of suggestions there, because I was not allowed to work while I was in school. So 18, I was getting my first job, and I'm like, I have no experience. But I did things in high school that I could count as experience. I did job shadows. I'm not sure if you did anything like that, or volunteer experience, hobbies. Huh? Oh, yeah. You know what? That's something that you can talk about in an interview, yeah. But you're doing career development, that's something that you can talk about. Like, hey, I went to this tech conference. This is something I'm interested in. Over, summer break, whatever, after school, you can find something like a local library get some volunteer experience. A lot of small businesses don't have a tech staff at all. You know, you can say, hey, you know, either see if they'll do hire you or let you volunteer for them. Also look for internships. My company does mostly for college. They'll do internships, but there's a lot of places that will hire younger kids as interns. They're not paid quite as much as a full-time employee, but it gets you that experience and it gets you in the door. You can also look, as you're starting to look at college, if that's something that you're choosing to do. One of my first real IT jobs was working help desk at my college's computer lab. It was through the financial aid office because I was a student worker, 20, 25 hours a week, but it gave me that experience. And we replaced 800 computers one year. You know, I put that as a resume bullet. You know, I was part of a team that replaced 800 computers at such and such community college. So there's a lot of things you can sort of get involved with that aren't work that show that you're interested. And if you're having trouble finding volunteer intern experiences or technical jobs, build a home lab. If you're on Spiceworks, if you're not, highly recommend it, but check out Spiceworks and also Reddit's Home Labs subreddit and build a lab. You can get some pretty cheap stuff, even if you buy a Raspberry Pi for 20, 30 bucks and play around with that and start learning Linux. There's a lot of ways that you can build your skills very inexpensively and put those as resume bullets without having work experience.
And to add on that, I actually have experience in this. As my friend Ben over there can testify, I ran a Minecraft server for 4 years. And with that, I had a lot of staff that were middle high school. And a few of those staff did want to get into technology. And one thing that I try to do with them is be a mentor for them. So that's another resource, is try to find mentors. Reach out in the community as well. There are posts on a regular basis of students, high school, college, or whatever. It's like, I'm getting ready to go into IT. What are some things I can focus on? So that's another resource. And at that point, you can ask for a mentor. Certifications. A+, obviously, you know, everyone who's been around for a while, you know, A+ is basic, but you know, it's a good stepping stone. It shows an employer that you're focused and committed to working on your career. So an A+ is a good step, and then you can kind of build up some certifications from there as well.
I want to add one thing to that too. Networking is huge. Things like this, make friends with other IT professionals that can not only help you learn things, but you never know where your next opportunity is going to come from. Every job that I've gotten has been because I knew someone that said, hey, there's this job opening, or hey, you know, we're hiring here. Why don't you put in an application? So networking is huge. Yeah.
One more thing.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Just one more thing real quick. If you do decide to go to college or take certification courses, most of the instructors are very familiar with what's out there, and they could probably point you. And some companies are actually hiring people straight out of computer colleges or ITT Tech or whatnot, and that's how I got my first job too. So
join a Spice Corps.
Yes.
Okay, I
last question?
Something for the young lady over there. If she's on Spiceworks, come join the Women in IT group.
Yep. Yeah.
You might find a mentor or 3 or 6 or something on there.
All right, we got time for one more question. We'll be around if you have other questions, but just, well, you know, if anyone has to head out, but feel free. No, feel free. Oh.
Hi. I was going to ask, like, I work in a school district, and in the school district, you have to have, like, a bachelor's to move up. And I'm currently working on my bachelor's. Mm-hmm. But here in Spice World, I realized that a lot of people that I met don't have a degree. And that blew my mind a little, because where I'm at, like, if you don't have a degree, you can't get an IT job.
Yeah.
So, like, what do you recommend? Do I move states?
So it's a values choice. You know, for me, I'm single, I don't have kids, so it's easier for me to pick up and move than someone who's married, who has a family. Do you like your state? I don't like my state. I'm ready to get out. But there's always going to be jobs that don't need the degree. There's always going to be jobs that do need the degree. It's all depends on what you want to do. What I have found is that a lot of times, if you want to get into management and move up, you're probably going to need that degree at some point for a lot of companies. I know my company, you don't need a degree to get in the door, but if you want to get management, you need at least a 4-year degree, if not more. There's really no simple, easy answer for that, unfortunately. It really is what is most important to you. I don't know if you guys have any comments on that.
So to have clarification, I have a master's in information technology. So fortunately for me, I haven't had that problem, but I see the discussion happen a lot in the community. And the one thing to know is for a lot of the job positions that you'll see is it's an HR filter, first off. So if you see a degree mentioned in there, there's a good chance that it's a requirement that HR has put down or someone in management has put down to have some kind of barrier, so not every Bob and Joe and Jane or whatever can apply to it. But if you have some way to show that you're working on something like that, or if you have experience to back it up as well, that's something you can focus on in your resume. And if you can kind of get a phone interview, you can definitely reinforce it there that, for example, in your case, you're working on a degree right now. So you can mention that in that resume and interview that you're working on it currently, or if you have any kind of experience that goes with it, it amplifies that a little bit more. And if you can get a contact within the company as well, that's also going to help that you have someone inside that will help boost it as well.
I thought that was actually just a car thing, a car industry thing. Our salespeople, our job applications, we require a 2-year degree, but no one in the car industry has a degree. But it's just like that's to filter out the knuckleheads.
Yeah, they hired him.
Pulled a facet on him, I did.
All right, thank you all for coming. I hope you found this valuable. If you have any additional questions, we're here. Reach out to us, so thank you.